The autumn of 2009 carried a peculiar heaviness in Asheville, North Carolina. October had arrived with its usual fanfare of crimson leaves and mountain fog, but something darker settled over the town that year. Three friends, 23-year-old Maya Reeves, her boyfriend Jake Hartley, and their mutual friend Connor Phillips drove into the Blue Ridge Mountains on October 17th for what was supposed to be a weekend camping trip. They never came back. Maya had grown up in Asheville, the daughter of a retired school teacher and a mechanic who ran a shop on Merriman Avenue. She worked at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where regulars knew your order before you reached the counter. Jake was studying forestry at UNC Asheville, a quiet guy with calloused hands who talked about conservation like other people talked about religion. Connor was the wild card, a photographer who'd dropped out of college to chase freelance gigs, always with a camera around his neck and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. The three of them had been inseparable since high school. They'd spent countless weekends in those mountains, knew the trails better than most park rangers. That's why, when Maya's mother, Patricia, called the sheriff's office on October 19th, she couldn't shake the cold dread in her stomach. Maya always called, always. If you're captivated by this mystery, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. The search began within hours. Sheriff's deputies found Jake's truck at a trailhead near the Pisgah National Forest, driver's side door slightly ajar, keys still in the ignition. Their camping gear was missing: tents, sleeping bags, food supplies. But Jake's wallet sat in the cup holder untouched. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just an abandoned vehicle and three young people swallowed by the wilderness. Search and rescue teams combed thousands of acres. Helicopters swept the canopy with thermal imaging. Volunteers from surrounding counties showed up by the dozens, forming human chains across ridgelines and ravines. Patricia spent every daylight hour at the command post, a makeshift setup in a church parking lot, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Jake's parents drove up from Charleston, trying to make sense of the impossible. Connor's father, a stoic man who'd served 2 tours in Iraq, organized his own search parties when he felt the official efforts weren't enough. Days became weeks. The story made regional news, then national. Missing persons posters plastered every gas station, grocery store, and post office from Tennessee to Virginia. Tips flooded in. Sightings that led nowhere, theories that crumbled under scrutiny. Some claimed they'd seen the trio hitchhiking near the Tennessee border. Others reported a similar-looking group at a Greyhound station in Georgia. Every lead dissolved into dead ends. Detective Linda Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, took personal charge of the case. She interviewed everyone who knew them: co-workers, professors, drinking buddies, ex-partners. She dug through their phone records, bank statements, social media accounts. Nothing suggested they'd planned to disappear. Maya had a shift scheduled at the coffee shop on Monday morning. Jake had a midterm exam on Tuesday. Connor had a photography exhibition opening the following weekend at a local gallery. The mountains, though, kept their secrets. Winter arrived early that year, dumping 18 inches of snow by Thanksgiving. The searches became sporadic, then stopped altogether as hypothermia became a bigger threat to rescuers than any chance of finding survivors. By Christmas, the case had gone cold in more ways than one. Patricia refused to take down the missing persons posters. She kept Maya's room exactly as she'd left it: concert tickets still pinned to the corkboard, laundry basket half full, a library book with a bookmark on page 47. Jake's parents eventually returned to Charleston, their son's bedroom transformed into a shrine of hiking boots and field guides. Connor's father spent his evenings drinking bourbon on the back porch, staring at the dark outline of the mountains. In 2010, Detective Morrison reopened the case with fresh eyes, considering possibilities she'd initially dismissed. Had they staged their own disappearance? Financial records said no. None of them had the resources or motive. foul play. But there was no evidence of violence, no enemies, no threatening messages. The wilderness itself seemed the most likely culprit, though even veteran search teams found it hard to believe 3 experienced hikers could vanish so completely without leaving a trace. Theories proliferated online. True crime forums dissected every detail. Some believed they'd stumbled onto an illegal marijuana grow operation and been killed by dealers protecting their crops. Others suggested they'd fallen into an unmapped cave system. A few fringe theorists proposed cult abductions or human trafficking rings. The speculation became noise, drowning out the actual investigation. Years passed. The story faded from public consciousness, relegated to unsolved mystery databases and late-night true crime podcasts. Patricia aged a decade in what felt like months, her hair turning grey, her shoulders permanently hunched. She attended support groups for families of missing persons, sitting in circles with other parents whose children had simply vanished, leaving nothing but questions and grief that had no outlet. Detective Morrison retired in 2017, but she never stopped thinking about those 3 kids. She kept the case file in her home office, reviewing it occasionally, hoping something new would click. It never did. By 2023, the disappearance had become local legend, a cautionary tale parents told their teenagers before they headed into the mountains. Be careful. Remember what happened to those kids back in '09. Then, on March 14, 2023, a college student named Brianna Chen posted a TikTok video from a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. The video was nothing special, just Brianna showing off an elaborate latte art creation, talking about her barista training. The clip lasted 18 seconds. It got a few hundred likes, a dozen comments. Brianna thought nothing of it and moved on to her next post. But 3 days later, her phone exploded with notifications. Someone had paused the video at the 7-second mark. In the background, partially obscured by an espresso machine, a woman was visible wiping down tables. The angle was awkward, the lighting fluorescent and harsh. But the woman's profile was clear enough. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun, a small tattoo on her left forearm, a mountain outline with a crescent moon. Maya Reeves had an identical tattoo. Patricia had described it in dozens of interviews, had included it in every missing persons report. It was distinctive, custom work from a local artist in Asheville who'd closed his shop in 2011. The TikTok video went viral within hours. The Reddit community Unresolved Mysteries picked it up. Twitter exploded with speculation. True crime YouTubers scrambled to cover the development. By the end of the week, the video had 17 million views. Patricia saw it on a Wednesday morning. Her neighbor's daughter showed her, hands shaking as she held up her phone. Patricia stared at the paused image, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd memorized every contour of her daughter's face, had spent 14 years seeing Maya in every dark-haired woman who passed her on the street. This wasn't imagination or desperate hope. This was her daughter. She called Detective Morrison, who'd been receiving calls all morning. Morrison contacted the Portland Police Department within the hour. Officers arrived at the coffee shop, a place called Drizzle and Bean on Hawthorne Boulevard, before lunch. The manager, confused by the sudden police presence, confirmed that a woman named Emma Keller worked the morning shift. She'd been employed there for about 8 months. Reliable, quiet, kept to herself. She wasn't scheduled to come in again until Thursday. When officers arrived at the address listed on Emma Keller's employment paperwork, they found a studio apartment in a converted warehouse in the industrial district. The landlord let them in with a master key after they explained the situation. The apartment was sparse, a futon, a small table, a kitchenette with mismatched dishes. Clothes hung in a narrow closet. A succulent plant sat on the windowsill. No photos, no personal mementos, no evidence of a life that existed before Portland. Emma Keller didn't show up for her Thursday shift, or Friday, or ever again. The apartment was processed like a crime scene. Fingerprints came back as a match for Maya Reeves. DNA from a hairbrush confirmed it. The woman living under the name Emma Keller was, without question, the girl who disappeared from those North Carolina mountains 14 years earlier. But where had she been, and why had she run again? Detective Morrison pulled back into the case she'd never really left, flew to Portland. She interviewed Brianna Chen, who felt terrible about potentially causing someone to flee. She talked to the coffee shop manager, co-workers, the landlord, neighbors. Everyone described Emma as polite but distant. She didn't socialize, didn't talk about her past, paid her rent in cash, worked her shifts, and went home. One co-worker mentioned that Emma seemed nervous around smartphones, always positioning herself away from cameras. Morrison obtained footage from security cameras near the apartment. Emma had left on the evening of March 17th, 3 hours after the police visit, carrying a backpack and a duffel bag. She'd gotten into an older Honda Civic with Oregon plates. The vehicle was registered to a Daniel Ortega from Eugene, but when police tracked him down, Ortega said he'd sold the car for cash 6 months ago to a woman who said her name was Kate. No last name, no paperwork, just cash and keys. The investigation exploded into a multi-state effort. The FBI got involved. Maya's image, aged by 14 years, appeared on news broadcasts across the country. Patricia made tearful appeals on national television, begging her daughter to come home, promising that whatever happened, they could work through it together. Jake's mother, now in her 70s and using a walker, spoke to reporters from her home in Charleston, her voice breaking as she asked about her son. Connor's father had passed away in 2019, but his sister released a statement pleading for any information. The public response was overwhelming. Tips poured in from all over the Pacific Northwest. Maya had been spotted in Seattle, in Vancouver, in rural Washington, in Northern California. None of the sightings panned out. Digital forensics teams analyzed Emma Keller's sparse online footprint. She had a basic email account. No social media, no digital presence beyond what was absolutely necessary for employment. She'd been living like someone actively trying to stay hidden. But why? And where were Jake and Connor? Morrison assembled a task force that included FBI agents specializing in missing persons and behavioral analysis. They created a timeline of Maya's life as Emma, working backwards from the coffee shop job. Before Portland, they traced her to Sacramento, where she'd worked at a bookstore for 9 months under the name Claire Douglas. Before that, Eugene, where she'd done seasonal work at a nursery as Rachel Flores. Before that, the trail went cold somewhere in Northern California. Each identity had been carefully constructed. She'd obtained social security numbers through identity theft, borrowing information from deceased individuals whose deaths hadn't been properly documented in databases. She'd worked cash jobs when possible, always staying below the radar, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections. The question that haunted Morrison was simple. Was Maya running from something, or was she running from someone? Bank records revealed that Emma Keller had been wiring small amounts of money, never more than $300 at a time, to a post office box in Bend, Oregon. The box had been rented under yet another false name, but the postal worker remembered the person who collected the mail. A thin man with a beard, probably in his 30s, always wearing a baseball cap. When shown photographs, the worker hesitated, then pointed to an age-progressed image of Connor Phillips. Morrison felt the pieces shifting, forming a picture she didn't understand yet. If Maya and Connor were both alive, both hiding, where was Jake? And what had happened in those mountains that made them disappear for 14 years? The investigation took another turn when a ranger in the Pisgah National Forest contacted the tip line. He'd been following the case and remembered something strange from October 2009. About a week after the trio disappeared, he'd found a campsite that looked abandoned in a hurry. The fire pit was cold but recent. Food had been left out, attracting animals. A tent had collapsed in a windstorm. He'd reported it at the time, but it hadn't been connected to the search because it was nearly 12 miles from where Jake's truck had been found, too far for investigators to think it was relevant. Morrison requested the original report. The ranger had noted something else. Scratched into the bark of a nearby tree, barely visible, were 3 letters: J.H.D. Jake Hartley died. The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. She contacted a forensic anthropologist and organized a search team to return to those coordinates. In late April 2023, with spring mud sucking at their boots and rain dripping from the canopy, searchers found human remains in a ravine about a quarter-mile from the old campsite. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Jake Hartley. The medical examiner determined that he died from head trauma consistent with a fall, probably within hours of the injury, probably 14 years ago, give or take. The truth was starting to emerge, terrible and simple. They'd gone camping. Something had gone wrong. Jake had fallen, maybe hiking in the dark, maybe trying to find help. By the time Maya and Connor found him, it was too late. But why run? Why not call for help? Morrison theorized it out with her team. 3 young people, scared and traumatized. Maybe they'd been drinking or using drugs. Maybe they were afraid they'd be blamed. Maybe Jake had been doing something reckless, and they panicked, thinking they'd be charged with negligence or manslaughter. Fear made people do irrational things. Fear made people disappear. But 14 years? That level of commitment to hiding suggested something more than panic. That suggested guilt or terror. The media frenzy intensified. Patricia, confronted with the news about Jake, broke down on camera, her grief for the boy she'd known since he was 15, mixing with desperation to find her daughter alive. The story dominated news cycles. Everyone had theories. Everyone had opinions. Then, on May 2, 2023, Detective Morrison received an email. The sender address was a random string of letters and numbers sent from a library computer in Olympia, Washington. The message was brief. "Stop looking. We didn't kill him, but they'll kill us if you find us. Please stop." No signature, no details, but Morrison knew it was Maya. She contacted the Olympia Police Department immediately. By the time officers arrived at the library, whoever had sent the email was long gone. Security footage showed a woman in a hoodie and sunglasses using the computer. The image was too grainy for facial recognition, but Morrison knew the slight build, the nervous way of moving. "They'll kill us if you find us." The word "they" changed everything. This wasn't about Jake's death. This was about something else, something that had kept 2 people in hiding for more than a decade, something worth abandoning families and identities and entire lives. Morrison's team went back to the beginning, re-examining everything with this new context. They looked at who owned the land near where Jake's body was found. They investigated illegal activities in the Pisgah National Forest in 2009. They cross-referenced unsolved crimes, missing persons, and known criminal operations. 3 months into this new phase of investigation, they caught a break. A former Forest Service employee came forward after seeing the news coverage. He'd been fired in 2011 for drinking on the job, but he remembered something from late 2009. He'd stumbled onto what he thought was a meth lab deep in the forest, hidden in a box canyon that wasn't on most maps. He'd reported it to his supervisor, but nothing came of it. When he asked about it weeks later, he'd been told to forget what he saw and keep his mouth shut. He'd gotten the impression that someone higher up was being paid to look the other way. Morrison dug deeper. She found connections between a local sheriff's deputy and a drug trafficking operation that had been dismantled in 2015. She found financial irregularities in the original 2009 search operation, resources diverted, certain areas marked as already searched when they hadn't been. She found evidence of corruption that had allowed a significant criminal operation to function in those mountains for years. The theory crystallized. Maya, Jake, and Connor had accidentally stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. Maybe they'd photographed it. Connor always had his camera. Maybe they'd been spotted. Jake had died trying to escape, falling in the dark as they ran. Maya and Connor had made it out, but they knew they'd been seen. They knew that coming forward meant putting targets on their backs. So they'd vanished, started over, built new lives in the space between identities, always looking over their shoulders. Morrison couldn't make any of this public. The corruption investigation had to proceed quietly. But she needed Maya and Connor to come in, to tell their story, to help identify the people who'd kept them running for 14 years. The problem was reaching them without alerting whoever they were hiding from. She tried something unconventional. She arranged for a specific message to be broadcast on a true crime podcast that had been covering the case. The host, a woman named Jennifer Valdez, who'd built a massive following, agreed to help. At the end of her episode reviewing the latest developments, Jennifer added something off-script. Maya, Connor, if you're listening, and I think you might be, there are people working to protect you now. The corruption has been exposed. The people you were afraid of are either dead or in custody. You can come home safely. Your families are waiting. Detective Linda Morrison wants to talk to you, and she promises you'll be safe. There's a number for you to call, completely confidential. You've been running long enough. The number went to a secure line monitored by Morrison and a trusted FBI agent. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Then, on a Thursday evening in late July, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was hoarse, shaking. "Is this really over?" Morrison felt tears prick her eyes. "Maya! Is this Maya?" "We didn't kill Jake. We tried to save him. But they were coming, and we had to choose between dying with him or running. We chose wrong. We've chosen wrong every day for 14 years. Where are you? I need proof first. Proof that the people from the mountain are really gone." Morrison had prepared for this. She listed names, arrest records, death certificates. She explained the corruption investigation, the convictions, the dismantling of the trafficking operation. She explained that the deputy who'd been on their payroll had died in a car accident in 2018, that the man who'd run the operation had been killed in a prison fight in 2020, that the others were serving life sentences in federal prison. There was silence on the line, then crying, deep, broken sobs that sounded like they'd been held in for more than a decade. "Connor's with you?" Morrison asked gently. "He's been with me the whole time. We couldn't separate. We were all each other had, all we had to hold on to. Your mother wants to see you, Maya. She's never stopped looking, not for a single day." More silence. Then in a whisper, "Will she forgive me? For leaving her? For letting her think I was dead?" "She loves you. That's all that matters to her." It took another week to arrange. Maya and Connor needed time to process, to believe that the nightmare was really over. They needed time to gather the courage to stop running. Morrison handled everything personally, coordinating with FBI agents she trusted, arranging for safe transport, keeping the media away. On August 3rd, 2023, a car pulled up to a small house in Asheville. Patricia stood on the porch, Detective Morrison beside her, both women holding their breath. The passenger door opened. A thin woman with dark hair stepped out, moving slowly, like she was walking through a dream. She looked up. Her eyes met her mother's. Patricia made a sound that wasn't quite a word, wasn't quite a scream. She ran down the steps, her 72-year-old body moving faster than it had in years. Maya met her halfway, and they collided in the middle of the front walk, holding each other with the desperation of people who'd been drowning and finally found air. Connor stood by the car, watching, tears streaming down his face. Morrison approached him slowly. "Your sister is inside," she said. "She's waiting for you." He nodded, unable to speak, and let her lead him toward the door. The reunion was private, sacred. Morrison gave them space. conducting the formal interviews over the following days. The story that emerged was both simpler and more complicated than anyone had imagined. They had been camping. They'd chosen a remote area, wanting solitude. On their second night, Connor had gone out early to photograph the sunrise from a ridgeline. He'd seen the lab, just a glimpse through the trees, enough to know it was wrong. He'd taken photos, not really thinking, just documenting like he always did. 3 men had found their campsite before he got back. Maya and Jake hadn't known what was happening until the men started asking questions. Who else had they told? What had they seen? Jake, trying to protect Maya, had said the wrong thing. One of the men had pulled a gun. They'd run, scattered in different directions in the chaos and darkness. Jake had fallen almost immediately, his head striking a rock with a sound Maya said she still heard in nightmares. She'd reached him, tried to stop the bleeding, screamed for Connor. By the time Connor found them, Jake's pulse was already fading. They'd held him as he died, whispering promises they couldn't keep. They'd known they couldn't go back. The men had seen their faces. One of the men wore a badge. They'd seen it glinting in the firelight. If they reported Jake's death, they'd have to explain why they were running. They'd have to mention the lab, and then they'd be dead too. So they'd walked out of the mountains in the pre-dawn darkness, leaving everything behind. They'd hitchhiked west, using the small amount of cash Connor had in his wallet. They'd invented new names and built new lives from nothing, always afraid that someone would recognize them, always ready to run again. They'd watched the news coverage from internet cafes and library computers. They'd seen their family's pain and carried that guilt like stones in their pockets. But fear was stronger than guilt. Fear kept them moving. The hardest part, Maya said, was the anniversaries. Every October 17th, wherever they were, they'd find each other and sit together in silence, remembering Jake, remembering the life they'd lost, hoping that someday they might be able to stop running. The story went public in carefully controlled stages. Morrison worked with prosecutors to ensure Maya and Connor wouldn't face charges for identity theft or for not reporting Jake's death. Their circumstances were extraordinary, their fear justified. The district attorney agreed that they were victims, not criminals. The media coverage was intense but eventually faded. The internet moved on to the next mystery, the next tragedy. Maya and Connor stayed in Asheville, slowly rebuilding relationships with their families. It wasn't easy. There were therapy sessions and difficult conversations and nights when the past felt too heavy to carry. But they were home. Patricia sold her house and bought a small place with a mother-in-law suite where Maya lived while she figured out who she was now. Connor moved in with his sister at first, then eventually found his own apartment downtown. He picked up a camera again, slowly, teaching himself to see beauty instead of danger through the viewfinder. In October 2024, 15 years after that terrible camping trip, Maya and Connor hiked to the place where Jake's remains had been found. Patricia came with them, along with Jake's mother, who'd made the trip from Charleston. They placed a marker there, a simple stone with Jake's name and the years he'd lived. They didn't say much. Some losses were too big for words, but they stood together on that mountainside, 4 people bound by grief and survival, and they let themselves finally believe it was over. Maya returned to school, studying psychology with a focus on trauma. Connor got a job teaching photography at a community center. They both volunteered with organizations that helped missing persons and their families. They turned their nightmare into purpose, using their story to help others. Detective Morrison retired for the 2nd time in 2024, but she stayed in touch. She'd call every few months to check in, to make sure they were okay. She'd become more than an investigator to them. She was the person who'd brought them home. On a cool evening in November 2025, Maya sat on her mother's porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Patricia brought out 2 cups of tea and settled into the chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Do you ever regret it? Patricia asked quietly. Coming back? Maya thought about the question. She thought about the years spent looking over her shoulder, the exhaustion of maintaining lies, the hollow ache of living half a life. Then she thought about her mother's hand in hers, about Connor's laughter, about waking up without fear. No, she said, I regret running, but I don't regret coming home. The mountains rose in the distance, dark against the darkening sky. They'd kept secrets once, those mountains, but secrets never stayed buried forever. Eventually, truth found its way to light, even if it took 14 years, a viral TikTok video, and the determination of people who refused to stop looking. Maya squeezed her mother's hand. Somewhere in those mountains, Jake rested under the leaves and seasons. They couldn't bring him back, but they could remember him. They could carry his story forward. They could live the lives he never got to finish. And that would have to be enough.